Hi, welcome to the episode. My guest today is Jessica Gibson. She is the CEO and co-founder of Ariel Precision Medicine. Jessica started off in medicine and science as an education and then morphed herself into business and management, driving her day-to-day operations on a value of integrity and patient outcome. I hope you enjoy this. Jessica, thank you for being with me today. I really appreciate you taking a chance and having a chat with me. So let's. I want to hear about you and about Ariel. So take me through that. How did you get to this spot?
So I'm Jessica Gibson. I'm CEO and helped to co-found Ariel Precision Medicine almost 10 years ago now. And my background, I studied emergency medicine at University of Pittsburgh, was in gastroenterology research for a couple of years when I just recognized the MD, PhD track wasn't for me. I really loved creating things and innovating and saw an opportunity to do that in industry. So built up a really successful career in the pharmaceutical and genetic sequencing space. Always saw an opportunity for genetics to be utilized to better care for patients. I wouldn't go into healthcare if I didn't actually care about doing good for people. So my co-founder, Dr. David Whitcomb, was teaching a class at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh at the time on precision medicine for biomedical engineers. And it was really kind of the signal that technology was sophisticated to a point where it could actually efficiently be integrated into the way that we identify symptoms of a disease, use the best data available to focus on what was actually driving it biologically, and then from there develop treatments that target that dysfunction in these complex chronic diseases with high unmet need. A lot of them are orphan disease, no treatments because it was so challenging. So I am so grateful that we're about to hit our 10-year mark. We've made pretty significant progress and are continuing on that trajectory, just ready to hit our growth phase.
Well, congratulations. That's 10 years goes by in a flash when you're really into what you're doing, isn't it?
It does.
And how did you, so you started in science, right? And how did you, what point, what turned on the light where you were like, I'm going to shift from the science side of things to like being on the business side of science?
I mean, so somebody asked me previously, like, when did you know you were an entrepreneur? And I wouldn't, label myself that, but my parents told me, they're like, you were always out hustling. Like, we didn't give you money. We told you figure it out. And I was baking cookies and selling them through my neighborhood as a little kid, washing people's cars, always looking at kind of connecting people with solutions or products that could help them or they'd be interested in. So I would say in the path to pursue a degree in medicine, I recognized, this was 20 plus years ago. A lot of medical health care was protocol driven. So if you see this, then this is what you do. And sometimes the actual appropriate solution is way down the list of all the different things you try and error. And I felt at that time, it didn't really give me an opportunity to be creative, to be innovative. And I have a lot of empathy. So it was really difficult for me to see people suffering right in front of me. Sometimes there wasn't something I could do to help. Emergency medicine probably wasn't the best track because you're right there.
Front line. Yeah.
I had a friend that recruited me to California saying, you don't know this, but you're going to be great in business. And I kind of got the ick where I was like, oh, I like my ivory tower. I like doing good. And, she helped identify that like really what you're doing is helping people with their problems. You're connecting them with solutions that are going to benefit them. So, built up a career. But I would say that for me, the tipping point of actually doing Ariel is kind of coming from, corporate America. Is a lot of times, our approach in healthcare is treating symptoms. We are managing symptoms and failing to actually get to the root cause. And in a lot of, chronic conditions, patients have the same presentation. They kind of have the same clinical symptoms. So we treat them with like step 1, step 2, step 3. And then if this fails, we'll try this. When there are many different causes that can all look the same. So, when I was in gastroenterology research at University of Pittsburgh, the chief of gastroenterology, hepatology, and nutrition, Dr. Whitcomb, had always been kind of a maverick. He'd very out of the box thinking in the way that we can integrate multidisciplinary tools and converge them on helping a single patient. And I thought that this would be a really cool way to fill a need. I would say kind of the hub spoke model, where you create a centralized tool and then actually parse out the pieces of information or the products or services to the stakeholder to streamline this whole healthcare journey patients find themselves on.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because it is a journey, and it is a little bit overwhelming. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
to start with, you're dealing with a health issue that has confronted you and probably taken a person by surprise, and then they have to navigate this system of understanding how it works, and it is a complex system. It really is. So the fact that you found a way to kind of, and more or less simplify it, not only for the patient but for the provider, a way to help almost fast track the diagnosis process so that you can get them into a more customized treatment plan, right?
Right. When you think of like digestive and metabolic diseases, which is an area that we're heavily focused in, if you have abdominal pain or something, there are literally 100 different things that can cause that. And
Yeah.
like I think it's 1 in 5 Americans suffers with, some digestive or metabolic disease. And the diagnostic odyssey that some of these patients have been through, seeing so many different specialists, getting every test under the sun, when I think an objective piece of data like their genetics can help us hone in immediately at the onset of symptoms. We want to know
Mm-hmm.
what is causing this in you and remove the other 90% of things that are very low probability and help support physicians' clinical decisions on a enriched path of saying, there's a high probability in this patient that these are the things that are driving or contributing to their disease progression. And, another thing is our poor healthcare providers and physicians are so overwhelmed with so many different pieces of data that are coming out all the time. They've got 15-minute visits to see some of these patients. It can be incredibly challenging and a heavy lift for them to figure out, what are all the things that we could be doing for this patient. And I think with, the tools that we've tried to design, they're very, they're informed by physicians, designed for physicians and patients. But how do we help physicians get in contact with the right information for each patient really early on in that patient's journey?
And these tools you're talking about are based in AI, right?
I mean, AI is a component. It's a tool.
A component, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, the Human Genome Project was finished like very early 2000s. 20 years later, we're still just scratching the surface on how do we actually understand this data and implement it into our healthcare system. And a lot of doctors are not trained on genetics. It's also very complicated. So how do we use tools like, AI as a broad umbrella to look at complex patterns in patients? So for genetic information, in rare disease, it can be binary. You have one bad mutation that causes this full phenotype of a disease.
Right.
But in most diseases, it's a combination of a couple of things, like an engineering problem that are occurring simultaneously that can be impacted by an outside event. And then how do we help aggregate a comprehensive view of all the different systems that might not be working optimally that are causing this big problem. And then we can model and roll that back saying, okay, if this system is 60% dysfunctional, how do we tip that threshold to where the patient's body's natural compensatory mechanism can address it? What are the levers that we pull or targeted treatments we use to return this patient to a healthy state?
Right. Because sometimes it's the treatment actually that, the illness can be sort of taken care of, but then sometimes the treatment has its own side effects or its own byproduct on the individual. And so this is something you're trying to eliminate, kind of more perfect the treatment process so that it has less impact on the person and more impact on the disease, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, because it's not, I'd say the field of like pharmacogenomics really caught my interest probably about 17, 18 years ago. And that was where, it goes through how a patient's body breaks down different drugs and different things. And where Ariel is moving a little bit further upstream is, is the actual right disease being treated? Is the right process being treated? And then from there, something like pharmacogenomics is a useful tool in saying, okay, this is what we're actually targeting. What are the therapeutics or interventions that this patient's going to respond best to? And moving beyond this, we'll try this for 3 months. If it doesn't work, then we'll try this, or we'll add 2 more medicines on. And these patients are sometimes taking 5, 6, 7 pills, where some of them are to cover the symptoms of another pill, and they may not actually be metabolizing it in appropriate amount, or they might need a dose adjustment. So I think all of these components are really critical to helping a doctor and the patients and their families and caregivers know how can we be informed in the way that we approach, my health and on an individual patient basis. So it's really at Ariel, we're focusing on flagging early symptoms of a disease, using a patient's own genetics to kind of see how they're hard coded in where there might be dysfunction, and alerting the provider to that. And then if there's a treatment decision made from there, where does something like pharmacogenomics come in? And then as a precision medicine company, we happen to use genetics as a tool. We have a platform that integrates clinical, environmental, and genetic information for each patient. But kind of like that hub spoke model where we create a centralized technology, the data can be used for different stakeholders, where, used for patients, used for providers, used for, diagnostics to select, which biomarkers might be appropriate for measuring a dysfunction, and for treatment. It's the medicine part that the precision technology facilitates in a precision medicine solution. So we're actually using our technology to develop first in disease treatments, like actual therapeutics for chronic diseases with high unmet need. Right.
So providers can, a patient can either come in with an existing illness, or maybe even a family trait that they're concerned about, right? And get that test done and predetermine if, you are actually genetically predisposed to that condition or that illness.
Yeah.
And how to, emotionally, mentally prepare for it, but also to have a bit of a plan of attack as to how to manage that moving forward. But their patients are doing that with a lot more clarity, and so are the providers, right? I mean, it's really interesting that Ariel sits in that space where you are actually, direct in direct relationship with the patient in a sense, as well as a provider, and like you say, multiple stakeholders in the process, and back end right into pharmaceuticals. So it's a very interesting position to be in, to have an effect on all those different areas.
Yeah, and in the disease application, when we're looking at something like pancreatitis or pancreatic cancer, your genetics don't change. Your patient report at 6 years old and 36 is the same, but their clinical context might be very different. So what we're trying to flag is not everything under the sun that you're at risk for, but if there's symptoms of a disease or a family history of concern, how do we, in the use case of pancreatic cancer, how do we
Mm-hmm.
identify patients that are in high risk group so they can get focused screening? There's some really cool liquid biopsy technology coming out for picking up
Yeah.
pancreatic cancer, but there's a portion of the patients that don't make that marker. So
Right.
the provider, we inform the provider of where that patient is saying, this, some liquid biopsies might not be appropriate for this patient because they don't make this marker, or kind of giving that lead time to pick up, any changes that are happening as soon as possible.
Interesting. I can see how this was so interesting to you and drew you in. It's really interesting. So on that note, think about how. So you were in science, and then all of a sudden you got recruited to California, and you're now working in the corporate world. How did you mesh those things? With thinking about your values and your philosophies. How did you mesh these two worlds? Because you were a little bit hesitant about moving into corporate America. How did you bridge that gap?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a lot of curiosity. Get I can get bored, so I tend to go really deep into wanting to understand all of the different aspects. I think in when I was in pharma, it helped me to really deeply understand the U.S. healthcare system, or
Right,
the
which is
process
very
that patients.
intricate.
Yes, when it goes from a hospital organization or insurance or disease focus. There's so many different components that kind of under the hood that people don't appreciate. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I've really made it a component of like a core value I have is to operate with integrity, is to be transparent and honest
Mm-hmm.
and saying, this probably isn't a great fit for you, or, there's concerns here. You might want to consider something different. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then something that I think I was confronted with is I came out of kind of a medical track with a little bit of rose colored glasses, thinking everybody just wants to help. People, you want to do good. Um, and, there were some elements in the pharmaceutical industry that I was confronted with where, I was doing the right things. I was reporting things. I was, appropriately educating, providers or different stakeholders with the scientific peer-reviewed evidence that I had access to. And then there was this pull to kind of bleed that line, and I was just not about it. I had because I have family members that are chronically ill, and in my mind, there's always a patient on the other end of it, and I'm not messing around with that. And
Yeah.
I kept getting promoted. I'm an incredibly hard worker, and I just got to the point where I said, I want to do something meaningful and not be stuck in a system that is going in a different direction than aligns with my values. So I went back to school, got my executive MBA. I continued to try to equip myself to lead Ariel and, be useful and helpful to, the healthcare community. I've gotten the board of, the National Pancreas Foundation, which is a national patient advocacy group, nonprofit, and just trying to keep integrated into a path that aligns with where I think healthcare optimally should be heading.
Amazing. Yeah. So I think a lot of people can probably relate to being in that position at some point in their career, particularly in healthcare, because you're, like you said, there is always a patient at the other end. Doesn't matter what aspect of healthcare we're talking about. That's the need. And people got to keep that in mind. So I'm sure you're going to have that will probably inspire a few people to do a career change. During your transition in your career and starting with Ariel, give me some insight on some of the challenges you faced in your role. Getting Ariel off the ground. You're the co-founder, so you've been there during all sort of the initial roads and obstacles that typically hit businesses. But give me an insight on how that went through, and maybe some challenges that you went through, and how you kind of resolved those.
Yeah. So I had taken management training courses and decided I did not want to be a boss. I love helping people. I love being useful, but I just didn't want to tell people what to do. And when we started Ariel, I was the chief commercial officer. I was responsible for generating business and building a lot of the products, really chief operating officer as well. And at that time, we had an experienced, seasoned CEO that had kind of come out of the pancreatic disease space. But about 18 months in, it just became apparent that it just wasn't a great fit. How rapidly technology was emerging was just difficult for them to keep up with. So the board and my CFO asked if I would temporarily step in as CEO, and that was 8 years later. So still waiting for them to get a real CEO. But you know,
You must be doing a good job then.
honestly, I recognize that my leadership style works for a company like Ariel. I'm really focused on finding incredibly brilliant, talented people and putting them in a position to be successful. And honestly, I can say, I'm a great creative problem solver, but I'm really here to help. How can I equip you to be successful? What are the resources that we need in order to meet this milestone or execute? I'm very goal oriented. So it's been an incredible experience to just adapt some of my strengths to this role in leading the company. And I'm really grateful for, I'd say that some of the challenges were just the best learning opportunities.
Right. That's very true. Yeah, that if you don't learn from them, you can't learn if we don't fail,
Fail
right?
fast,
So
adjust.
it's part of the power size.
Yep.
And when you're thinking about from a business perspective, what point in your trajectory over the last 9 years where I guess you started experiencing growth? What do you think led to that, and how did you adjust to meet that growth?
So, our initial focus is on an orphan disease called pancreatitis. And one of the things that we invested heavily is understanding from healthcare providers, doctors that are managing these really sick patients, both in the clinical setting and then in research. What are the gaps and how can we fill them? So, working with a number of consortiums focused on pancreatic cancer, diabetes, pancreatitis, we were able to create kind of a win-win scenario where we're generating our own data and gleaning pretty groundbreaking insights from that. But how do we equip, the key opinion leaders and the leaders at the forefront of research in this space, with the tools to kind of find new discoveries faster and more efficiently. So I would say that growth was really helpful because it not only helped to reinforce what we were doing was meeting a need, but it's continued to help build out our reputation. I'd say when it comes to complex diseases, there has been some scratching of the surface of different ways to approach it, but we're creating an archetype with the disease like pancreatitis for other unsolved problems, to deeply understand it, equip the stakeholders with the best information, and ultimately continue to move the needle on patient care.
Mhm. So, and in somewhere in there, in that phase, you also had to discover and navigate incredible amounts of technology hitting you and hitting the industry. And I mean, I think we all experience it in every industry, but the last 5 years, it's just been mind boggling. So how did Ariel and you sort of pivot to adopt and integrate AI or health or tech or whatever else that came across your path? How did you, and how did you choose what
Yeah,
to
I
do?
mean, for myself personally, I ended up going through a training program through Stanford called Artificial Intelligence in Healthcare. And that helped
Good.
me to get kind of my finger on the pulse of where things were, what were the gaps, and where were they heading. So, in something really objective like imaging, it's leaps and bounds. Like it's so sophisticated and so clean. Um, and these new AI tools are they are emerging very quickly, so it's important to kind of keep up with where that trajectory is heading and make sure Ariel's aligned. Um, and then, I think being transparent about what is the actual use case and tool. When you think of like um, artificial intelligence, we're not running like a robot to solve these problems. There is very
Right.
careful, curated, um, multidisciplinary experts that are working with this data and working with tools like pattern recognition technology, which is kind of under the classification of machine learning, independent data sets that can either verify the accuracy of a finding or is this just a hallucination from the data. One thing that's become apparent is the quality of the data is paramount. So, we've invested heavily in curating our own data and being responsible. We set pretty high quality thresholds for what we accept, which leaves a lot
Right.
of data it doesn't make sense to integrate just because the quality and the accuracy just isn't there. So, I think we are a small component in this growing ecosystem of artificial intelligence in healthcare. And what's
Mhm.
awesome is that companies like NVIDIA and others are investing heavily in creating these products to make our job more efficient, make the tools that we
Mhm.
use, um, you know, better and better over time. So that continual improvement is something that I think is going to be critical, kind of breaking the barrier in some of these previously unsolved problems.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think you touched on something interesting about how we humans will still need to correct and modify and observe and oversee and make and cross check to make sure that the data, because you said something else that caught my attention, that was the hallucination of data. And you tell me about what you experienced in that, because I mean that's a very interesting topic. I've heard it a couple of times
Yeah,
before.
so I would say the term AI, Heath, when we started Ariel about 10 years ago, we were AI as in advanced intelligence for chronic diseases. So it's not
Right.
uh, it's not throwing a bunch of data into a learning program and just seeing what pops up. It's really
Right.
integrating the best minds across the world to focus on a problem. So, for example, when we look at genetic data, you can look at large data sets and look at healthy people and people with a disease and try to pick up a signal and say, this is the cause of the disease. And that is not the case for most diseases, where there can be multiple, if you think of it kind of mapping out the code of an engineering process where you've got something upstream that's broken by little, something, downstream that's broken by little, and independently those things don't cause a problem because your body can kind of account for them. When you've got a
Right.
number of things that when you look at kind of like from a statistical perspective, don't cause a problem, you have to change the way in which you look at the data and figure out how do we use like mathematical modeling to calculate the impact of all of these independent things that in combination cause a big problem. So, I
Mm-hmm.
think we're always cautious when we look at findings or discoveries and are very diligent and kind of, this, we don't operate in a black box where we throw a bunch of magic machine learning dust on it and saying, give us the answer. It is a very rigorous process to verify and validate any findings,
Mm-hmm.
understand what are the weights that kind of got us there. One of my data scientists is so meticulous and careful, and while it may take them a little bit longer, I know that that's going to be the right answer. And then we've got multiple independent places
Mm-hmm.
that can verify
Mm-hmm.
that. So I think it's um,
Mm-hmm.
approaching it with a lot of enthusiasm, but also caution and a little bit of temperance where we can say,
Mm-hmm.
this looks so cool and really promising. Let's understand this a little bit deeper. And anything that ends up becoming
Mm-hmm.
customer focused or customer facing has been through multiple rigorous steps to ensure the quality and the accuracy of the
Mm-hmm.
data. And then I think one of the other critical things that we've tried to integrate that is a kind of a meaningful opportunity for change for the healthcare system is as a patient's clinical state progresses, the features of their disease, comorbidities, their adverse events, lifestyle, environment, their weight, their, other things, all these things change. So how do we create a framework to actually model those based on something that's essentially locked data like their genetics, and then use those
Mm-hmm.
things to change the weight or the impact across, a person's health trajectory more comprehensively, because we
Right.
are a large body of interconnected systems that have to work together in
Yeah.
sync. And we can't treat a person like one organ or one problem. There's so many
No.
elements of our total quality of health, quality of life that need to be accounted for when you're looking at keeping a patient in the healthiest state possible, or moving them back towards health from a really bad disease place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. Thanks for clarifying that. That was a great explanation. So, I mean, that taking that in consideration, I mean, all that, I mean, the world is being bombarded by AI and technology, automation, et cetera, et cetera. So when it comes to something as sort of serious as someone's health and someone's outcome from illness, and you're trying to market this company and what you do and what you can, how you can help people, in all that noise out there, how do you get your message out? Like, how do you get to who you're trying to speak to? What tools do you use? What resources?
So I'd say one of the double-edged sword of having multiple stakeholders, kind of multiple customers, is, when you're a patient looking, saying, I just got this diagnosis, what do I do? We have, resources to help patients get connected with our products. When you're a provider, we work with a lot of conferences, we work with a lot of key opinion leaders, academic centers, to equip them with the most advanced tools that will improve the quality of care, really differentiate them and their group and institution as being a leader within that particular discipline. Um, on the drug development side, there's a lot of work in like AI in drug discovery, looking at all these different chemical compounds and what gets a signal. We kind of started on the other end where we started with a problem, we created a deep
Mm-hmm.
understanding of it, and then we looked at the landscape of drug compounds, saying, okay, for this patient type, what is going to work for them? And then that's kind of how we got into our lead asset, APM 176, is we we identified the highest percentage of disease driver in pancreatitis and found a compound that targets that specifically. So looking at this as a model
Mm-hmm.
for, um, we have patients that have consented to participate in clinical trials that they match up with in our database that have gone through our genetic testing. They and their provider have benefited from kind of insights into like, why am I sick? What is causing this in me and what's going to happen to me? And being able to
Mm-hmm.
match those patients to clinical trials that they might be appropriate candidates for, it is incredibly important, especially when you're dealing with underserved communities. In the drug development space, if you're
Mm-hmm.
looking at a rarish disease, finding patients enough to power a clinical trial can be challenging. We preemptively solved that problem. The I think um, the growth phase that we're at is really reaching out to other pharmaceutical companies and investors to collaborate and partner with either their compound in identifying the right patients that may benefit from it if it's an approved product, or identifying, from a kind of a patient stratification perspective, which patients would be most appropriate. The mechanism of their disease meets the mechanism of action of your drug, and really facilitating that. And we're taking the lead with our lead compound in a number of indications. But I would say accessing customers has to be tailored to where they're at. We work with patient advocacy groups, nonprofit
Mm-hmm.
organizations. When we're looking at like children, we work with a group called Rebecca's Wish that's focused on, pediatric pancreatitis. We work with Mission Cure, which is a nonprofit, National Pancreas Foundation, and expanding our reach into who are the stakeholders that actually care about this disease. And I think that, I
Mm-hmm.
guess from a marketing perspective, it's like, who cares about this and why should they care? And who's impacted by this, and how
Right.
can we, make them aware, educate
Mm-hmm.
them about what we've created that can serve that need.
Sounds like a lot of cross branding, cross pollination with other organizations and other stakeholders that have a mutual vested interest, whether it's in the patient or in the pharmaceuticals or in the providers. That's kind of interesting that you can tap into all those, but at the same time complicates the basic aspect of we can't just put out a Google ad or a Meta
Yeah,
ad. And I mean, sure, brand awareness is important, but at the same time, I don't think it's quite the
it's not
the
like a
avenue
widget
that's
where
going
we're
to hit
like,
your audience. It sounds like a lot more No,
but
no, no. It's a little more complicated. It's a lot more academia and sort of knowledge sharing, and probably a lot more face to face. Like, how do you meet with these people? I mean, it's attending conferences, it's speaking
yeah,
engagements, or maybe organizing those kinds of things. Are you doing a lot of that as
absolutely.
well?
And I'm so grateful for the integration of technology to allow us to like meet face to face virtually. But I also think there's a real value in kind of meeting people in person, grabbing a cup of coffee and like talking about,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
what you're doing. So I do a lot of that. I would say one of the elements of Ariel, when we look at like our advanced platform, our advanced technology, um, is it is that hub spoke model. So we really have kind of like a central set of tools that allow different products to be delivered to the different stakeholders. So, that simplifies it, where we're not creating, if you think of it like your iPhone, it used to just be a phone and an iPod. And now and
right,
sorry for the Android users, the
right.
Google Pixel people that hate iPhones, but would you say iPhone was the leader? Um, smartphone,
Smartphone. Say
smartphone.
smartphone. It's cross ranging,
But yeah, I
cross
mean,
brand.
smartphone. It is a central product that creates, so many different applications to different
Yeah.
customers for different needs, but they don't have to create a custom product for each person. They just have different applications that meet that need.
Right.
And we kind of think of it that same way, where we have, a
Right.
central tool which has a lot of utility just depending on its use case.
Yeah, good analogy. Like that.
Oh,
You're like a
thank you. A
smartphone.
smartphone. I'll keep that.
So I got one more question for you, and then we'll wrap it up. So if tomorrow morning you could wake up and one of your business challenges, wherever that may be, would be fixed, what would you pick?
We're really looking for a strategic partner or an investor to help with this growth phase for our drug development program. It's really the greatest value creator for both Ariel and the patient community, and really establishes the capabilities of kind of this wash, rinse, repeat model that we've integrated. But to get the first in disease treatment for an orphan disease that affects so many people, that would be like the feather in the hat of my career. But also I think it would be just a huge value creator. So tomorrow morning, I expect to wake up with a lot of requests to meet in my inbox.
Well, I wish that
Thank
for
you.
You. You never know. I'm glad, and maybe it won't come from this because this won't be aired for a few weeks. But maybe after that,
Whenever
maybe it will.
whenever this goes
Who knows?
live.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate this conversation. I've enjoyed meeting you. Enjoyed hearing about your career and where you are with Ariel, and I hope maybe we'll have another conversation again. I'd love to have you back and we could talk about something different, or we can catch up from where we left off here today. And anyways, thank you again. Anything else you'd like to mention that we didn't cover, you want to make sure we talked about?
No, thank you for having me on. I'm more than happy to meet with people that are interested in learning more about Ariel or the diseases we're focused on. info@arielmedicine.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Jessica M. Gibson. So, really looking at connecting with, stakeholders that are interested in what we're doing.
I enjoyed my time with Jessica Gibson and learning more about Ariel Precision Medicine. I think my takeaway from this episode was that, Jessica's very clear on where she fits into the organization, and she discovered that along the way. And I think that's an important thing to understand, that, not everyone's cut out to be a boss. And I like what she said, that she goes, I don't want to be the boss. So she has chosen to, stick to her strengths, and as opposed to, floundering in the weaknesses. And then we've all probably experienced that at least once in our careers. And I think that her challenges have really been a driver for where she is now. And she's really learned from those experiences. And I also think that that's a great piece to take away with, is that, we learn from our failures. And then that's an important part of the journey. So thanks for listening today, and I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned.